The scent of fresh groceries lingers in the air, a mixture of crisp apples and the earthy sweetness of root vegetables still cool from the market. A gentle warmth fills the kitchen as the last glass jar finds its place on the wooden shelf, settling with a soft clink against its neighbors. The afternoon has that particular quality of softness, when time seems to move like honey, thick and golden, pouring itself slowly across the hours. Elara closes the cupboard door with a quiet click, and in that small sound there is a sense of completion, yet her mind has already begun its familiar dance, leaping ahead to what comes next, to the endless procession of tasks that fill her days like water filling a vessel that has no bottom. Her feet carry her through the doorway into the living room, where dust particles drift lazily through a shaft of sunlight that pours through the tall window facing the western sky. They float and tumble in the air like tiny stars in their own slow galaxy, catching the light and releasing it again, each mote following invisible currents of air that swirl and eddy in the stillness. The room is hushed, wrapped in the kind of silence that feels almost like a presence, a companion waiting patiently, asking nothing, offering everything. The walls hold the accumulated peace of a space that has witnessed countless quiet moments, and the very air seems to invite rest. She stands in the center of the room, her body still but her mind racing, feeling the pull of invisible threads, each one tugging her toward a different task, different urgency, different demand. Answer the messages that have accumulated on her phone, their notification lights blinking with silent insistence. Reorganize the bookshelf where volumes have been replaced haphazardly after evenings of reading, their spines no longer aligned in the careful order she prefers. Begin preparing dinner, chopping vegetables in a meditative rhythm, the knife against the cutting board creating a percussion that marks the passage of time. The list unfolds in her mind like a scroll, each item demanding attention, creating a familiar pressure behind her eyes, a tightness in her chest that has become so constant she barely notices it anymore. But something today is different. Perhaps it is the quality of the light, or the way the afternoon seems to be holding its breath, suspended between the busy morning and the inevitable rush of evening. Perhaps it is simply exhaustion, a weariness that has accumulated over weeks and months of constant motion, of never allowing herself to simply stop. Her gaze drifts to the armchair by the window, the one with the soft cushion that has molded itself to her shape over countless evenings of reading and thinking, and occasionally, though rarely, just sitting. Sunlight pools on its surface, making the fabric glow with an inviting warmth, and for a moment the chair seems to call to her, offering sanctuary, offering permission to rest. In this moment, standing between motion and stillness, between the demands of her endless list and the invitation of that sunlit chair, she makes a choice. It is not a dramatic decision, not a grand gesture of rebellion against the tyranny of productivity, but a gentle turning, like a leaf changing direction in a stream following a new current. She walks slowly toward the chair, feeling each step on the worn floorboards, hearing the small creaks and sighs of the wood beneath her weight, and lowers herself into its embrace, settling into the curve of the seat, feeling the cushion yield beneath her like a welcoming hand. The chair receives her weight with a familiar sigh, the old springs making their soft music, and she settles into its curve, her body remembering this position, this place of rest. For a moment, everything is still, suspended in a pocket of quietude. Then, almost immediately, the discomfort begins. Not a physical discomfort, though there is that too, a slight stiffness in her back from the morning's activities, but something more subtle, more insidious, a restlessness that rises from within like bubbles in still water, breaking the surface of her attempted calm with persistent regularity. It is the discomfort of stopping, of not doing, of allowing herself to simply be without purpose or productivity or forward motion. Her hands do not know quite what to do with themselves. They rest on the armrests for a moment, fingers curled loosely, but then they feel wrong there, exposed and purposeless, so she moves them to her lap, folding them together like birds settling into a nest. But that feels too formal, too contained, so they drift back to the armrests, and this small dance of uncertainty continues, her body seeking a position of rest, but not quite finding it, not quite able to surrender to stillness. Her mind, accustomed to constant occupation, to the endless processing of information and planning of next steps, begins to present its case with the practiced efficiency of a skilled lawyer. There are messages waiting, it whispers with urgent insistence. The bookshelf is in disarray and disorder breeds chaos. Dinner will not prepare itself, and the hour grows late. Each thought arrives like a messenger bearing an urgent summons, demanding immediate attention, immediate action. Let us wander together through this afternoon of stillness, where the only task is to simply be, to exist without agenda or achievement. This is a journey into the art of doing nothing, of discovering that rest is not laziness but wisdom, that stillness is not emptiness but fullness. If you would like to return to this quiet place, to find more stories that invite you to rest and remember what it means to simply exist, a gentle tap on the subscribe button will keep our door open for you, will ensure that these moments of peace are always waiting when you need them. And now let us continue on this journey of discovering that sometimes the most important thing we can do is nothing at all. Elara watches these thoughts as they appear in her mind, like clouds drifting across an inner sky, each one casting its small shadow. She does not push them away with force or scold herself for having them, for being unable to instantly achieve the peace she seeks. Instead, she simply observes, creating a small distance between herself and her thoughts, recognizing them as mental events rather than absolute truths or commands that must be obeyed. There is the thought about the messages, appearing with its little spike of anxiety. There is the thought about the bookshelf, carrying with it an image of disorder that feels somehow threatening. There is the thought that she is wasting time, being unproductive, failing somehow in her duty, to be always in motion, always achieving, always doing something that can be measured and counted and justified, but she does not rise from the chair. Despite the discomfort, despite the restlessness, despite every instinct that urges her back into motion, she remains seated. She makes a quiet commitment to herself, not spoken aloud but felt deeply in some place beneath words, beneath thought. She will stay here, in this chair, in this light, for this afternoon. She will allow the discomfort to be present without letting it dictate her actions, without giving it the power to pull her back into the familiar patterns of constant doing. This, she realizes with a small spark of recognition, is its own kind of strength, not the strength of pushing through or powering forward, but the strength of allowing, of accepting, of staying present with what is uncomfortable until it transforms into something else, something softer, something that might even be called peace. She becomes in this moment an observer of her own experience, stepping back from the river of thought and sensation to stand on the bank and simply watch the current flow, not judging what she sees, not analyzing or interpreting or trying to fix or change, simply witnessing with the gentle curiosity of someone watching clouds or listening to rain. Her role shifts from someone who must constantly do, constantly achieve, constantly prove her worth through action, to someone who can simply notice, who can be present with what is without needing it to be different. It is a subtle transformation, barely perceptible. Like water beginning to settle after being stirred, the sediment slowly drifting down to reveal clarity. Her eyes travel around the room, seeing it as if for the first time, or perhaps for the first time in a very long time, seeing it without the filter of familiarity that makes the known invisible. The way the afternoon light catches the edge of a picture frame on the wall, creating a thin line of gold that seems to glow with its own inner fire. The shadow cast by a potted plant on the windowsill, its leaves creating a delicate pattern on the wall behind it, an ever-changing artwork made by the collaboration of light and living things. The slight curve in the floorboard near the doorway, an imperfection that speaks of the house settling over time, of wood responding to seasons and moisture and the patient weight of years, each board telling its own quiet story of endurance. These are things she has seen 1,000 times, walked past without thought, incorporated into the background of her daily life until they became invisible through sheer familiarity. Yet now, in this state of quiet observation, they emerge from invisibility like stars appearing as the sky darkens, each one worthy of attention, each one containing its own small beauty. Her attention, usually scattered across multiple concerns and divided among competing demands, narrows and deepens, becoming focused not through effort, but through the natural settling that happens when the mind is allowed to rest. She is not thinking about these details, not creating mental commentary about them, but experiencing them directly, without the filter of language or judgment or comparison. She becomes aware of sensations in her body that are usually lost beneath the noise of constant activity, subtle messages that the body sends, but which are rarely heard in the rush of daily life. The slight pressure where her back meets the chair, the way the cushion supports her spine and allows her shoulders to drop, the weight of her hands resting in her lap, palms up or down, she is not quite sure without looking, but present nonetheless, solid and real. The gentle rise and fall of her chest with each breath, a rhythm she rarely pays attention to, but which has been constant since her first moment of life, will continue until her last. This steady tide of inhalation and exhalation that connects her to every living thing that breathes. Between the thoughts about tasks and productivity, about all the things she should be doing, small gaps begin to appear, moments of pure presence, lasting only a second or two at first, where there is no mental narrative, no commentary, no judgment, only awareness itself, clear and open. These gaps are like clearings in a forest, small spaces of open sky visible between the canopy of trees, and through them she glimpses something vast and peaceful, a dimension of existence that is always present, but usually obscured by the constant chatter of thought. She does not try to hold on to these moments or make them last longer, knowing somehow that grasping would only make them disappear, like trying to hold water in a clenched fist. Instead, she simply notices them when they appear, grateful for these brief windows into stillness. She makes a deliberate choice to turn her attention outward, away from the internal chatter that has been her constant companion, toward the world beyond the window. Her gaze moves slowly, without hurry, to the window where the afternoon light pours in, to the square of blue sky visible beyond the glass, vast and unchanging yet never the same from one moment to the next. There, drifting with magnificent slowness across this frame of blue, is a single cloud, large and full and soft-edged, its whiteness containing depths and variations that become apparent only with sustained attention. It moves across her field of vision with a patience that seems almost deliberate, as if it knows that it has all the time in the world, that there is nowhere it needs to be except exactly where it is. The cloud is not perfectly white, but contains shades of cream and pale grey, especially where it is thickest, where layers of water vapor accumulate to create density and depth. The edges are soft and undefined, feathering out into the blue, and she watches as it moves across her field of vision with imperceptible slowness, changing shape so gradually that the transformation seems like magic, like something impossible made real through patience. A rounded edge becomes slightly more elongated over the course of minutes, stretching toward some invisible destination. A thick section begins to thin and wisp away, the water droplets evaporating back into invisible vapor, the solid becoming insubstantial, the defined becoming diffuse. There is something mesmerizing about this slow metamorphosis, something that captures her attention in a way that feels effortless, requiring no discipline or will, only a natural settling of focus onto something genuinely interesting. The cloud does not hurry toward any goal, does not have a destination marked on some celestial map, does not carry the burden of productivity or purpose. It simply exists, moved by currents of air too vast and gentle to be felt from the ground, shaped by forces beyond its control and beyond its concern, transformed moment by the physics of water and air and temperature. She finds herself breathing in rhythm with its movement, her chest rising and falling in that same unhurried cadence, as if cloud and breath are connected by invisible threads, as if she is learning from this drifting vapor how to simply be. As her vision softens, focusing on the distant cloud while allowing the foreground to blur slightly, her hearing sharpens in compensation, the way senses often balance each other when we allow them to work naturally. Sounds that were previously just background noise, a meaningless wash of audio that she filtered out without conscious thought, begin to separate and clarify, each one emerging as distinct and worthy of attention. The distant hum of a lawnmower, steady and rhythmic, coming from several houses away where someone is performing their own Saturday afternoon task, the motor rising and falling slightly as it encounters thicker and thinner patches of grass. The higher-pitched laughter of children playing somewhere on the street, their voices rising and falling in waves of delight, creating a music of pure joy that needs no instruments beyond the human voice at its most unself-conscious. A breeze moves through the tree outside her window, the one that has stood there longer than the house itself, longer than any resident can remember, and she hears each leaf respond to this touch of moving air, thousands of tiny whispers combining into one gentle susurration, a sound like water running over smooth stones or silk sliding against silk. A bird calls out from somewhere in those branches, a clear three-note song that rises and falls and then stops, leaving silence in its wake, a silence that feels deeper for having been defined by sound. The world, which moments ago seemed like a blur of demands and obligations, a chaotic jumble of things requiring her attention and energy, becomes vivid and particular, full of small wonders that have always been present, but which she has been too busy, too distracted, too caught in the web of doing to notice. Something is shifting within her body, a release that begins in her shoulders, where she carries so much of her tension without realizing it, where stress accumulates in knots of tight muscle that feel almost like stone. She had not realized how much tension she was holding there, a tightness that had become so constant she no longer noticed it, the way one stops noticing a sound that never ceases. Now as she sits in the warmth and light, allowing herself this rare gift of rest, that tension begins to dissolve, slowly at first, like sugar stirred into warm tea, the crystals softening at the edges and gradually disappearing into solution. The relief is so profound it almost brings tears to her eyes, this simple act of letting go, of allowing muscles to soften and release their grip. Her shoulders drop slightly, settling into a more natural position, one that requires less effort to maintain, less constant vigilance against gravity. The muscles along her neck, which had been drawn tight like strings on an instrument tuned too high, begin to soften and lengthen, releasing their hold on her skull, allowing her head to rest more easily on her spine. This physical relaxation brings with it a corresponding mental ease, as if body and mind are connected by invisible threads, each influencing the other in a continuous feedback loop. As her body relaxes, her mind quiets. As her mind quiets, her body releases further. The process feeds on itself, deepening with each breath, with each moment of allowing rather than striving. Her breathing, which had been shallow and quick, residing mostly in her upper chest in the manner of someone perpetually preparing for action, begins to deepen and slow. She does not force this change, does not consciously try to breathe more slowly or more deeply, knowing somehow that such effort would be counterproductive, would only create a new form of tension. Instead, she simply allows her breath to find its own natural rhythm, trusts that her body knows how to breathe, has been breathing without her conscious intervention since before she was born. Each inhalation draws air deep into her lungs, expanding her ribs and belly, filling spaces that have been neglected, bringing fresh oxygen to cells that have been surviving on less than they need. Each exhalation releases not just breath, not just carbon dioxide, but worry, tension, the accumulated stress of constant doing, letting it all flow out and dissolve into the air. The warmth of the afternoon sun on her left arm becomes more noticeable, more present, moving from background sensation to the center of her awareness. It is a gentle heat, not harsh or burning, not the aggressive warmth of high summer, but the softer caress of autumn sunshine, mellow and kind. It feels comforting in a way she can barely describe, like a kind hand resting there, offering support without demanding anything in return. She can feel the exact line where sunlight meets shadow on her arm, a border of temperature on her skin, the illuminated part several degrees warmer than the part that remains in shade. The warmth seems to sink deeper, past the surface of her skin, into muscle and bone, spreading a sense of well-being through her entire body, like warm water poured into a vessel, filling her from within. She watches the patterns of light in the room shift with almost imperceptible slowness, changes so gradual that they can only be noticed by comparing one moment to a memory of how things looked minutes ago. A rectangle of sunlight on the floor moves a fraction of an inch as the sun continues its ancient journey across the sky, its edge becoming slightly less defined as the angle of the sun changes and the light must pass through more atmosphere, scattering and softening. The shadows cast by furniture lengthen by tiny increments, their edges blurring and darkening as the afternoon ages toward evening. Time has not stopped, but it has changed its texture, becoming something thick and rich rather than thin and fleeting, becoming something she can almost taste, almost touch. She is not impatient for anything to happen, not waiting for this experience to be over so she can move on to the next thing. She is simply here, present, alive, aware, and it is enough. The sounds from outside continue their gentle symphony, but they begin to blend into a cohesive whole rather than remaining separate and distinct. The lawnmower, the children, the leaves, the occasional car passing on the distant street, All of these merge into a single tapestry of sound that speaks of a world going about its business, peaceful and unhurried on this particular afternoon. She feels held by this soundscape, surrounded by evidence of life continuing in its patient way, and this feeling is deeply comforting, a reminder that she is not alone, even in her solitude, that she is part of a larger community of being that extends beyond her individual concerns. Her thoughts, which were so insistent earlier, have grown quieter, less urgent. They still appear, drifting through her mind like those clouds across the sky, but she no longer feels compelled to act on them, no longer feels that their appearance constitutes a demand. A thought about dinner arises, and she notices it, acknowledges it without judgment, and lets it pass. A thought about the messages on her phone surfaces briefly, and she observes it with the same gentle detachment, watching it appear and dissolve without grabbing onto it. This is not suppression or denial, not pushing thoughts away or pretending they do not exist, but something softer and more sustainable, a kind of allowing that paradoxically gives her more freedom than fighting ever did. There comes a moment, impossible to pinpoint exactly, when she realizes that she has stopped fighting, that the internal struggle between the part of her that wants to rest and the part that insists she should be doing something productive has resolved itself without her having to consciously choose a winner. The restlessness, which had been so present when she first sat down, which made her hands fidget and her mind race, has quieted like a child who has finally tired itself out with crying. She is no longer waiting for this period of stillness to end so she can return to doing, no longer counting the minutes until she can justify getting up and returning to her tasks. Instead, she finds herself inhabiting the stillness itself, becoming part of it, merged with it in a way that dissolves the boundary between observer and observed. Her gaze drops to the floor in front of her chair, where a shaft of sunlight illuminates a section of the wooden boards with particular clarity, bringing out details that are usually lost in the general dimness of an interior space. She has walked across this floor countless times, her feet knowing every board and gap without her conscious mind having to map them, but now she sees it with fresh eyes, the eyes of someone encountering something for the first time. The grain of the wood creates swirling patterns, like rivers seen from high above, or the contours on a map depicting invisible countries, each line recording years of growth in the tree that became this floor, each ring speaking of a season of rain and sun and the patient accumulation of cells. Some boards are darker than others, their surfaces marked by years of footsteps and the subtle movement of the house through seasons, by the slow wearing away that comes from use and time and the gentle friction of living. There are small scratches and dents, each one telling its own small story. A dropped pan here, a dragged chair there, the accumulated evidence of a life lived in this space. These imperfections, which might be seen as flaws in a showroom, here feel like character, like the lines on a beloved face that map a history of smiles and sorrows. There is a small knot in one board, perfectly round like an eye looking up at her from the wood, and around it the grain curves and flows in concentric circles, creating a sense of motion in the stillness, like water disturbed by a dropped stone, the ripples frozen in wood. She finds this endlessly fascinating, this small detail that has always been there but which she has never truly seen, never given her full attention. It feels like a gift, this moment of really noticing, of seeing what has been invisible through familiarity. The knot is slightly darker than the surrounding wood, slightly raised, and she feels an absurd impulse to reach down and touch it, to feel its texture beneath her fingertips, but she does not move, content to simply observe. She is not thinking about this experience as she has it, not creating an internal narrative that says, "This is nice," or "I am feeling peaceful," or "This is what it means to be present." There is no internal narrator standing apart and commenting on the experience, no layer of thought between her and the direct perception of the moment. There is only the direct experience itself, unmediated by thought or language or judgment. She is the warmth on her arm, the softness of the cushion beneath her, the play of light on wood, the distant sound of children laughing, the gentle movement of her own breath. Subject and object blur and dissolve, and there is only awareness itself, only this, only now, only the simple fact of being alive and conscious on this particular afternoon. A deep understanding settles into her, not as a thought, but as a felt truth that requires no words to be known, no argument to be believed. This moment of doing nothing is not empty or wasteful. not a void or an absence or a failure. It is full and nourishing, rich with presence and awareness, and the kind of rest that actually restores rather than merely postponing exhaustion. Her culture and her upbringing have taught her, through 1,000 subtle and not-so-subtle messages, that value comes from productivity, from achievement, from constant motion forward toward goals and accomplishments. That rest is something to be earned through sufficient labor, a reward rather than a basic need, and even then something to feel slightly guilty about, something to minimize and rush through so she can get back to the important work of doing. But here in this afternoon stillness, she discovers a different kind of value, one that has nothing to do with output or achievement or external measures of worth. The value of simply being alive and aware, of existing without agenda or purpose beyond existence itself. The value of allowing her nervous system to rest, her mind to settle, her body to remember that it is not a machine meant for constant production, but a living organism that needs cycles of activity and rest, engagement and withdrawal, doing and being. This is not laziness or self-indulgence, though she has been taught to see it that way. This is necessary. This is wise. This is how she will sustain herself for the long journey ahead. The afternoon deepens around her like water deepening in a pool, and with it, her state of rest deepens as well, each moment taking her a little further down, a little further in, to a place of peace she rarely accesses in her busy life. She allows her eyes to close, not to sleep, though sleep would be welcome, but to turn her awareness inward and to amplify the other senses that do not rely on sight, to discover what is available when vision is temporarily set aside. Behind her eyelids, there is a warm redness from the sun filtering through the thin skin, a gentle glow that pulses softly with each heartbeat, creating a rhythm of light and slightly less light, a personal aurora that no one else can see. With her eyes closed, sounds become even more vivid and layered, taking on a three-dimensional quality that was less apparent when sight was competing for her attention. She can distinguish between the whisper of leaves in the tree outside her window and the slightly different sound of air moving through the gap under the front door, each one having its own pitch and texture and quality. She hears the subtle creak of the house itself, the small adjustments of wood and beam as temperature changes, and materials expand or contract by infinitesimal amounts, the quiet language of a structure settling into itself. These sounds, which might be alarming if she did not understand their source, are instead deeply comforting, evidence that the house is alive in its way, responsive to the world, adapting to each moment. Her body feels both heavy and weightless, a paradox that somehow makes perfect sense in this moment of deep relaxation. Heavy in the sense that she is deeply anchored in the chair, every part of her relaxed and supported, her weight given fully to the furniture beneath her with no holding back, no tension, keeping her slightly elevated in readiness for action. She can feel gravity pulling her down and she does not resist, allowing herself to be heavy, to sink, to settle completely. Yet at the same time she feels weightless, as if she might float up and away if not for the chair holding her, as if the usual heaviness of embodiment has been temporarily lifted. There is no effort, no tension, no holding anywhere in her body. She is simply resting, like a leaf that has fallen onto still water, floating without trying, held by forces beyond her control and beyond her concern. There is a profound sense of safety in this moment, a feeling that becomes more apparent the deeper she relaxes, as if safety itself has layers and she is discovering ones that lie beneath the surface of everyday consciousness. Nothing is required of her right now. No one is demanding her attention or energy. Her phone is in another room, its notifications silenced by distance, if not by intention. The tasks that seemed so urgent earlier are still there, but they have lost their power to compel, have been revealed as less urgent than they pretended to be. She is completely free for this moment, this hour, this afternoon, to simply be, to rest in this pocket of time that she has carved out for herself through the radical act of sitting down and refusing to get back up until she is ready. This feeling of safety is rare and precious in her life, a gift she has given herself by choosing to stop, to sit, to do nothing despite every voice that told her this was wrong. The sounds of the neighborhood, which were so distinct moments ago when she first closed her eyes, begin to blend into a soft tapestry of background noise, like the sound of a distant ocean or rain on a roof far above. The children's voices fade as they move inside or down the street, their game concluded or transformed into something quieter. The lawnmower's hum grows fainter and then stops altogether. The task completed, the machine silenced, and she imagines the person who was pushing it now taking their own rest, perhaps wiping sweat from their forehead, perhaps pouring a cold drink. The world is gently receding, becoming less insistent, less demanding of her attention, wrapping her in a cocoon of quietude that feels like the softest blanket, like loving arms, like absolute permission to rest. Her breath continues its steady rhythm, and she brings her attention to it more fully now, using it as an anchor for her awareness, a place to return to when her mind begins to wander. Not controlling the breath or changing it in any way, not making it deeper or slower, or different from what it naturally wants to be, but simply observing it with gentle curiosity. The cool air entering through her nose, moving down her throat, filling her lungs from bottom to top, the slight pause at the top of the inhalation, a moment of fullness. Then the warm air flowing out, the body relaxing even further on the exhale, releasing and letting go. The gentle pause before the next breath begins, a moment of emptiness that contains its own kind of peace. This cycle continues, has been continuing since her birth, will continue until her death, and in this moment she is fully present with it, riding its waves like a boat on a calm sea. She has arrived at a place of complete tranquility, a state of being that feels both utterly natural and completely extraordinary, as if she has discovered something that was always available, but which she somehow forgot existed in the rush and noise of daily life. There is no longer any sense of journey or progression, no feeling of moving towards something or away from something, no narrative of before and after. She simply is, existing in this single, eternal moment that somehow contains all the time in the world, that expands to fill all available space until nothing exists outside of it. Her breath becomes the center of her awareness, not because she has decided to focus on it, but because it is the most obvious thing, the most present thing, the rhythm that connects her most directly to being alive. Not controlling it, not changing it, not trying to make it conform to some idea of how breath should be, but simply observing its natural rhythm with the gentle attention of someone watching clouds or listening to music. The cool air entering through her nose, a slight sensation of movement in the nostrils, filling her lungs with each inhalation, bringing oxygen to every cell in her body. The slight pause at the top of the inhalation, a moment suspended between in and out, a moment of fullness and completion. Then the warm air flowing out, slightly warmer than when it entered because it has been inside her, has been part of her for a moment, carrying away what is no longer needed. The body relaxing even further on the exhale, shoulders dropping a fraction more, jaw softening, eyes resting more easily in their sockets. The gentle pause before the next breath begins, a moment of emptiness that is not lack but potential, the space from which the next breath will emerge. Each breath is a small miracle when she really pays attention to it, an exchange between her body and the world that happens without her having to think about it or make it happen. Oxygen flowing in, diffusing through the thin walls of her alveoli into her bloodstream, carried by red blood cells to every part of her body, sustaining every cell, enabling every function, keeping her alive. Carbon dioxide flowing out, the waste product of cellular metabolism, exhaled into the air where it will be taken in by the plants beyond her window, used by them to create energy and growth, transformed into the oxygen she will breathe tomorrow. She is not separate from the world, but intimately connected to it through this constant rhythmic exchange, this endless conversation between inner and outer, self and other. Breathing in, breathing out, the most fundamental act of living, usually unnoticed, now the entire focus of her gentle attention, and in this focus there is peace. Time has lost its meaning in this deep state of rest. She does not know if she has been sitting here for 10 minutes or an hour or somewhere in between, and it does not matter, truly does not matter, in a way that feels liberating. She is not tracking time or watching a clock or waiting for anything to happen or end. The present moment has expanded to fill all available space, and within this expanded now, she is completely at peace. There is nowhere else to be, nothing else to do, no other way she should be feeling. This is enough, she is enough. This moment is complete and perfect exactly as it is, requiring nothing to be added or taken away. This is the summit of calm, the deepest point of rest, a state so still and quiet that it might seem like nothing at all to an outside observer, might look like simple sitting or perhaps even sleeping, but from within, It is everything. It is fullness and completion. It is rest so deep that it reaches into the oldest, most tired parts of her being and offers them respite, offers them permission to finally put down the burdens they have been carrying for so long. The part of her that is always planning, always preparing for the next thing, grows quiet. The part of her that is always judging, always comparing herself to some impossible standard, grows still. The part of her that is always afraid, always waiting for something to go wrong, relaxes its vigilance. She is held by the moment, cradled by the afternoon, embraced by the simple fact of her own existence, and it is enough, more than enough. It is everything. The quality of light in the room begins to change, a subtle shift that draws her awareness gently back toward the surface, like a diver ascending slowly from the depths, taking time to adjust to each new level. The bright gold of afternoon has softened into something warmer, deeper, tinged with the first hints of evening that will soon transform into dusk. Amber and honey tones wash across the walls, and the shadows have grown longer and softer at their edges. No longer the sharp-edged shadows of midday, but something more diffuse, more gentle, like watercolor bleeding into wet paper. She opens her eyes slowly, very slowly, allowing them to adjust gradually to light after the warm darkness behind her eyelids, not rushing this transition from inner to outer awareness. The room looks the same in its physical arrangement, the furniture exactly where it was, the pictures on the walls unchanged, yet somehow everything appears different, as if she is seeing it through new eyes, or perhaps seeing it clearly for the first time. Everything appears slightly more vivid, more present, edges clearer and colors richer, as if a film she did not know was there has been wiped away. The room seems to glow with its own soft light, welcoming her back to the world of sight and form. A feeling of gratitude rises in her chest, warm and expansive, spreading through her body like warmth, spreading through cold hands held near a fire. Gratitude for this time she has given herself, for the courage to stop when everything in her culture tells her to keep moving, for the chair that held her through this journey, for the afternoon light that kept her company without asking anything in return, for the simple fact of being alive and conscious on this particular afternoon, in this particular body, in this particular moment. She does not speak this gratitude aloud, but it fills her nonetheless, a quiet thanksgiving that needs no words to be complete, no expression beyond the feeling itself. Something has shifted within her, a change so subtle that she might not be able to describe it to someone else, yet so profound that she knows she is not quite the same person who sat down in this chair. It is not that her to-do list has disappeared, or that her responsibilities have vanished into the afternoon air. They are still there, waiting patiently as they always do, the messages still unread, the bookshelf still in need of organizing, the dinner still unprepared. But the weight of them has changed. They no longer press upon her with the same urgency, no longer feel like obligations that define her worth or determine her value as a person. She feels clearer, more spacious inside, as if the act of doing nothing has created room for her to breathe, to think, to simply be herself without the constant pressure of productivity measuring her every moment. She does not leap up from the chair in a sudden burst of renewed energy. Instead, she moves slowly, mindfully, bringing the quality of presence she has cultivated in stillness into her movement, allowing the peace to continue even as she transitions from rest to activity. She places her hands on the armrests and rises gradually, feeling the shift of weight from chair to feet, the engagement of muscles that have been resting, the body transitioning from complete rest to gentle activity. Each movement is deliberate, conscious, a continuation of the meditation rather than an abrupt ending of it. Standing now beside the chair, she feels different than she did when she first sat down, transformed in some essential way that goes beyond the simple passage of time. The restlessness that drove her from task to task, that made her feel like she was always behind and could never catch up no matter how fast she moved, has been replaced by a calm centeredness, a sense of being grounded in herself in a way that feels stable and true. She is not sluggish or sleepy, not dulled by rest, but rather refreshed and clear, as if she has drunk deeply from a well of peace that exists within her, always available but rarely accessed in the rush and noise of daily life. The weight that pressed upon her shoulders when she walked into this room, the invisible burden of all the things she must do and be and accomplish, has lifted. Not permanently, perhaps, because the world and its demands will return as they always do, but for now she feels light, unburdened, free in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. She has discovered something important in this afternoon of doing nothing, a truth that her body and soul already knew, but which her mind had to relearn. Taking time to do nothing is not selfish or wasteful, not a luxury to feel guilty about, or a weakness to be ashamed of. It is essential. It is a way of caring for herself, of replenishing the well so that she has something to give, of remembering that she is a human being, not a human doing, and that her worth is not measured by her productivity. She glances back at the chair, seeing it now not just as a piece of furniture, not just as a comfortable place to read in the evening, but as a sanctuary, a portal to peace, a place where she can return whenever the world becomes too loud and demanding, and she needs to remember what stillness feels like. The afternoon light has nearly faded now, the golden glow giving way to the soft blue of early evening, and soon the room will be filled with the deeper colors of dusk. But the peace she found here, in this chair, in this light, in this afternoon of doing absolutely nothing, will remain with her, carried in her body, held in her memory, available to return to whenever she needs it. She moves toward the kitchen, but with a different quality than before, a different relationship to movement itself. There is no rush, no sense that she is behind, or that time is slipping away from her like water through cupped hands. She is simply moving from one moment to the next, from one room to another, carrying the stillness with her like a precious thing, allowing it to infuse even her actions. Productivity and presence, she realizes, need not be enemies. They can coexist, each enriching the other. Action arising from stillness, doing emerging from being, the two dancing together instead of fighting for dominance. Our story of stillness comes to a gentle close, this journey through an afternoon of doing nothing and discovering everything. May you find your own chair by the window, your own shaft of afternoon sunlight, your own permission to simply sit and be without purpose or agenda. May you learn, as Elara learned, that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is nothing at all, that rest is not weakness but wisdom, that stillness is not emptiness but fullness beyond measure. If you are still with us, wandering in this quiet space between waking and sleeping, still listening to these words as they flow like water over smooth stones, a gentle light helps others find their way here, helps these stories reach people who might need this reminder that it is okay, even necessary, to stop. And if you subscribe, you will always have a place to return when the world asks too much, when the demands become overwhelming, when you need to remember what peace feels like. Our library of quiet stories will be here waiting, a sanctuary of stillness in the noise. Thank you for sitting with Elara today, for learning alongside her this gentle art of Niksen, this Dutch wisdom of doing nothing with intention, of allowing yourself to simply be. Thank you for giving yourself permission to rest, even if only for the length of this story. May you carry this peace with you into your evening, into your sleep, into your tomorrow. Rest well, dear listener. Sleep deeply and wake refreshed. Good night.